Hey guys, so I wanted to talk a bit more about chat control, some of the updates and what we need to know about it, because this isn't just going to affect Europe. This is going to affect major platforms like Signal, WhatsApp, and others that offer end-to-end encryption. And I'm going to cover some of what the threat is of this law, also some of the people behind it, and some of the activities that are going on, and some of the latest updates to chat control. So don't think this is only going to affect Europe. There is always the possibility that these platforms, or whichever platforms become affected, which are mainly the ones that have a corporation or an actual nonprofit group behind it, that can be pressured, and of course potentially even the developers themselves could be pressured to introduce some kind of bug or backdoor in order to scan all messengers. So this includes end-to-end encrypted messengers. It's a huge issue. Now, on the other hand, I do have some good news for those. Of course, if there are any extra laws that come out, it may affect this as well, but there are decentralized messengers for end-to-end encryption that cannot be pressured in the same way, and when there is pressure, there's always forking, and we all love forking. So if there is something that comes about, of course you're going to want to abide by any local laws and regulations in your area. But if you are in an area where you're allowed to use end-to-end encryption and you're not affected as much by these crypto wars, well, XMPP is one option you may have. It also offers Omemo encryption. So think of this like Signal's encryption, because it is basically the same thing. Decentralized protocol where you can set up different chat servers, chats with end-to-end encryption as an option. XMPP is an open source project. It is not tied to any one major organization, and what we're looking at now is an example client. This is Dino, and Dino is a great client. I do recommend, so I did want to cover, end-to-end encrypted messengers as well, which I've done in the past, but I kind of want to do a refresher, as even if a serious law were to come against major platforms such as, for example, Facebook's WhatsApp, or even possibly Signal, which I should mention, Signal has mentioned their willingness to leave the UK if they're affected by some of the overreaching mass surveillance laws that seek to target end-to-end encrypted messengers. But either way, what you may like to know about is the fact that XMPP and independent forks may also not be affected by some of this regulation. But of course, you need to look into this yourself. You need to make sure that you're abiding by whatever the local laws and regulations are in your area. So we can see a chat window. I actually opened a chat with myself, so I could even leave myself notes here. I could go ahead and set it to my PGP key and then type something like secret message. And as you can see right here, we have a lock there. Now, with the unencrypted, if I were to send it unencrypted and just say hi, it won't have the lock. And if you're in a conversation with someone else, it'll actually show an open lock in place here. So you do have some sign that you're not using encrypted messaging. So you can also use the Omemo, which I actually recommend over using the PGP. The PGP is nice and convenient because if you've already exchanged public keys, you can get started right away with that. But you can also do the same with Omemo, but they have to have a client that can carry that capability. So if you're using an end-to-end encrypted messenger and you don't have the built-in capabilities, if you're using, say, a different version of an XMPP messenger and it doesn't have the ability to use Omemo or PGP, you're not going to be able to chat using that encryption that way. So this is one other alternative to some of the main platforms, and I did want to mention that. But of course, like I mentioned, of course, if any laws come out that somehow regulate encryption, you may be in trouble there, so don't go against any of your local laws and regulations. Make sure you follow those to a T. But did want to mention that XMPP is one thing that may not be affected by this law. Of course, you'll need to do your own due diligence on this to find out what is affected and what isn't affected, because of course if there is a regulation forcing even open source developers to implement something, then we're all in trouble there. So we go through this, and as Patrick Breyer, the member of the Pirate Party, has mentioned, of the European Parliament, he's also a co-negotiator of the proposal. He's also warning of the consequences. So this proposed bill would mandate introducing surveillance bugs and vulnerabilities into what is currently secure end-to-end encrypted messaging, such as WhatsApp or Signal. So this is going to affect major platforms if it goes through, and nobody is going to be untouched. In fact, it could even become implemented internationally, so it may not just be the EU. So even if the companies themselves don't implement it internationally, if other countries, usually allies, tend to make and follow each other and do this lockstep of cracking down on civil liberties and rights. When that occurs, a lot of times you're going to see allies follow suit and introduce very similar laws. And we can see evidence of this when we just look at some of the current legislation that has come out in the floodgates of things like the Earn It Act, things like the KOSA bill, which is the Kids Online Safety Act, which has some similar provisions that threaten your private communications. And so these things are all being framed in the manner of we're going to protect kids, just like with terrorism. And now with things happening in the Middle East, well, it's looking like terrorism as an excuse to take away your right to privacy is coming back. So yes, that's right. Terrorism is trending once again as a means of taking away secure end-to-end encryption. Imagine that. And when terrorism doesn't work, go back to the kids and say you're protecting them. And that's just how we do this. We cycle through those two things to pass legislation and ram it down the government and the people's throats. So that's just the way things are going at the moment. So I did want to cover that, and I also have some good news on this bill, actually. So as we can see, obviously, criminals, the thing about it here is when you criminalize encryption, who's left with encryption? Only criminals will have secure encryption. How much sense does that make? Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Yeah, because it doesn't make sense. And criminals are always going to find a way around these regulations. Instead, you're just criminalizing the general populace by criminalizing secure communications. You're also threatening journalism. I made a comment about that. So I also posted about this update. So make sure to follow me over on Mastodon at falstodon.org/@RTP. You can follow me there. I'm always posting some of the latest, most important news and tips as well. So with this, as I mentioned here, this bill will chill free expression, journalism, and activism. And if that were the actual ambition, the invisible, we scan it all, is the perfect plan. And it is exactly that. It is something that could be used to simply let everyone know they have no privacy, that they're being watched and reported on. This is truly Orwellian legislation. If you are in the EU, make sure to write your local representatives and let them know, and write anyone who's involved in this legislation. Now, we can also go and see with these bills, there's actually a new scandal out. It looks like they're using micro-targeting advertising to mess up a poll, where they're sending out a poll, but they're not just sending it to the general populace. And what this is doing is it's making it look like there's actual support for these encryption destroying bills. But what they're actually targeting is they're targeting, do you want to protect kids, to conservative Christians? That's going to be a big priority. So this is, as I keep bringing up, this is psychological warfare commercialized. So it's very dangerous for governments to get involved in psychological warfare through micro-targeting ads against their populations. So it's a very big deal. And we also see one of our favorites here, Ylva Johansson, and I'm not sure if I pronounced it right, but I'm going to continue. And if you look down what she is covering, you'll notice things that can be used to threaten encryption. And so we see things about illegal and terrorist online content. Of course, this is the type of propaganda that could be used to threaten encryption as well. The next, we see other things that may not be actually related to it, but as you continue on, you see that, well, it turns out it is EU Trafficking Day. And so, of course, this is being used as well to bring attention to the agenda, which is to essentially break encryption. And so I wonder how long it has been EU Anti-Trafficking Day, or if it was created just for this lobbying effort, because it is certainly a lobbying effort, especially when you skew the results of polls by using micro-targeting for conservative Christians who obviously have very strong beliefs, and using scary imagery to frighten residents to allow them to see a possibility of breaking encryption as a solution. And then, of course, you have yet another thing that directly relates, because, of course, we know drug trafficking commonly associated with secure communications, but, of course, the majority of people using secure communications have nothing to do with criminal behavior. And as I mentioned, the best way to threaten journalism, free expression, and activism, the best way to threaten democratic principles is to come out with legislation that wants to scan everything and not tell you about it. An invisible "we scan and report you all" application on your device. And so we even note that Matthew Green had reported on an article I actually covered earlier, and the fact is this is not just going to be limited to protecting kids or terrorism. And we know this. We've seen it with every other bill, and of course, they don't want any kind of filtering. As it mentions here, quote, "all data is useful and should be passed on to law enforcement. There should be no filtering by the EU Center, because even an innocent image might contain information that could be useful to law enforcement," end quote. As we can see, the agenda is not just to go and protect kids. The agenda is not to go after terrorists. The agenda is to collect it all and then leave everyone with the ashes of democratic principles. Make sure to check out the blog at bmc.link/politictech. The good news, though, is there is a postponement on Chatcontrol. So Chatcontrol is postponed, and there are some recommendations. So they're talking about how they don't want a blanket scanning of everyone's messages, but they want to actually go after people who are actually already suspects. That sounds reasonable, but as long as it doesn't force this software on everyone's phone, because that's a very real problem. We can't allow these lobbyists to continue to manipulate the public and take away their civil liberties, their freedom, their privacy, their liberties. We just can't allow it. And so I'm going to continue covering these stories, giving you guys updates on them. As I mentioned, one of the things that may not be affected by it is something like XMPP. But of course, ensure you check in, make sure you're not affected by any legislation that may go against using secure encryption. That sure sounds Orwellian even saying that, but I feel like I have to because of the way things are going. So guys, look forward to reading your comments. Make sure to share the video, like it, subscribe, follow the blog. It's free to follow at bmc.link/politictech. And if you want to buy me a coffee there, you always can. It is like $5. You could join a membership if you want to support the channel. And this channel is independent content. We don't have any sponsors or anything. I just try to give you information I think that everyone needs to know about. And I'm considering trying out some new types of content just to mess with the algorithm. But the best thing you can do to help the channel is share the video, like, subscribe, follow, and if you want to join the membership at bmc.link/politictech/membership. Of course, any help is always greatly appreciated with helping get these videos out there. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will be back with more tips on how to protect your security and privacy.